Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Society for Quality Assurance, my webinar presentation, Data Integrity and Document Control Challenge. My name is Kevin Bogert. I'm from Azimuth Compliance Consulting, and I will be your presenter today. Our company specializes in quality and compliance consulting and software solutions for the highly regulated life science industry. My agenda today is what is data integrity? I want to discuss a 483 and some takeaways from it. What is document control system? What is a controlled document per ISO and FDA? What can be done to ensure your company does not encounter the same observations as that company that got a 483? And where do you go from here? And then at the end, any questions that you may have for me. So what is data integrity? As FDA defines it, it's completeness, consistency, and accuracy of the data. ALCOLA, otherwise known as. The FDA looks at the data for its whole life cycle, from the time it was created through its whole process to its final record retention period ends. So you must be able to track that data from when it's created to you finally can dispose of it because it's no longer required to be maintained. Metadata. This is data about data. Again, this falls into the record retention period, so data and its metadata must be maintained. Audit trail, 21 CFR Part 11. This is part of the guidance document for data integrity. So they want to know the reconstruction of the course of events that have occurred. From the time the record was created, any modifications or any deletions of those electronic records. And audit trails. They want to see the creation, modification, and deletion, and track certain actions as well. So attempted access the system, or rename a file, or delete a file. But they also want you to be able to see that you've been reviewing your audit records for any particular abnormalities that might have occurred during the process. Now there's two key parts. You saw on part 11. The guidance talks about data and records and everything else, but the main thing is records. If it's not part 11, it's all about records, either fixed, static data, or dynamic, meaning some interaction. So you have a piece of equipment that you interact with, fill in some parameters, and then it starts recording the data. At the end, a report gets generated. That's your dynamic data. You have both the report and that interaction with that instrument or equipment. The FDA expects that to be one record. Versus static record is that form that you complete, fill out, sign, return to document control. That's your static. Increasingly, the FDA has been giving out violations for data integrity during inspections. And the primary purpose the FDA looks at is to help manufacturers with the tools and systems they need to prevent adulterated products. So they're saying this part 11 or this audit trail that we're really focusing on, and the record retentions from the time it's created, any changes that have occurred to it's finally done of that document or record, isn't maintained. And the place they go is document control. You are the maintainer of these documents and these records. So what is the data integrity takeaway from all these findings? The warning letters from 2005 through 2019, reviewing of 196 of them, found that 131 times incomplete or missing records were discovered. Excuse me. Access control, 61 times there were access control violations. 49 times destroying or deleting GMP records or GLP records or whatever it is. And then renegation, integration, reprocessing, or inappropriate manual interaction or integrations with systems. This is where you go and you have that dynamic data and you change the name of the file at the end because it failed. You change it from whatever it was called, the test. And then audit trail. findings in the audit trails, companies not reviewing the audit trails, or audit trails don't even exist. So between 2016 and 2019, the FDA issued 39 import alerts as it related to data integrity versus the prior 11 years, they only saw 3. So let's look at a 43 as it relates to data integrity. The first observation had all really to do with Part 11. Lack of the username and password and of audit trails. I tie this back to the previous screen of the second one and the fifth one. And then deleting of records, I tie it back to the third one I mentioned, and so forth. So the FDA focused on and said, okay, were this a valid, is it tracking usernames and passwords, or is this shared username and password? Are the audit trails there? Is a user able to delete records without it being tracked, or files that are there for that dynamic data? They can delete them or rename them, and there's no audit trail of it, or it doesn't match the audit trail. It was called lot 123, and the FDA looks for lot 123, run 1, and they find test. Well, that's not in the audit trail, so that's an issue. And then there's no procedure for reviewing the audit records. Do you have that as part of your process? From a data integrity issue, it is. From a Part 11 perspective, it is a violation. Okay, second observation, submitting paper documents that are not originals. Companies didn't have controls in place for handling this. They didn't know how many printed documents were out there. There was no way to track them. The FDA observed people printing more documents than they required and discharging the extras. They discarded GMP documents. Basically, they filled it out wrong, they got rid of it, had a new one, reprinted one, or whatever they did, made a copy of them before they started, and used those. So they found in those trash bins incomplete or completed records that had errors, and they were just discarded into the trash bins and re-executed. Or blank forms, not used, and were discarded instead of turned back to document control. So the main organization responsible for all this is document control. Are you tracking that document or form from the time it's printed to the time it's returned? Do you know where it is? Do you know who has responsibility for it? Do you get back to original, or are you getting back copies? Is there a way to differentiate the two? So FDA came out with this guidance document on data integrity. They also are coming out with this computer software assurance for addressing these two issues. The 21 CFR Part 11 and validation as required, and the record from time of creation to time of disposal. Are you tracking it? So Deming had a nice, interesting quote, and this is probably real life in many companies. They go and complete a form, fill it out, sign it, return it to document control, and document control stores in the document repository and is never looked at again until the FDA walks in. So what's the purpose of even filling out the form? Except to say, I did that task. But there's key data in there that is very useful. If you look at a company like Amazon, and you sign in there and you order something, they know what you ordered, when you ordered it, how many you ordered of it, and they come back and give you recommendations as what you should order next. They can predict what you're going to do next. Well, you have no way of predicting what's coming next because you don't even keep the data. It's all a museum piece, as Deming would say. So what is a document control system? I'm not going to read all these. I'm going to just point out the main differences between a document management and document control as it relates to 21 CFR Part 11 or the data integrity guidance document. So record retention, that's one item. That's from Part 11. The FDA mentions it in the data integrity guidance document of from the time created to the time you can dispose of it. Are you keeping it throughout the life cycle, a record of it? So you have a way of archive and managing that archive of that document or the electronic record. That's part of your document control system. Do you identify and control the distribution of external QMS documents? Most companies will say, yes, I do that. For our procedures and policies, we put expiration dates on, and after that, they cannot use them. But what about your forms? What about when you print out a form and it's completed? How do you track that and control the distribution of it? Someone could just log into your system and print 20 of them out. Do you know they printed 20? Well, maybe you do. But do you have a way to differentiate the 20? Probably not. What about blank forms? What happens to those? Well, those are required to be returned back to document control because that's part of your process. But many companies just dispose of them. This is a data integrity problem. Okay, so document control based on ISO. ISO, you can read all these, but the main two pieces are there's nothing really specific around making copies or how they handle unused forms. And they do have stuff about record retention. It's mentioned there, but not to the level that the FDA. And they do not mention anything about audit records. What the guidance document does mention is all those ISO requirements, not directly, but it's there. But they also talk about identify and control the distribution of the QMS document, including the blank forms. It specifically mentions blank forms because they know that's where the issues are. They also mention record retention. From the time that document is created, meaning the form is printed out, is filled out and returned so that it's been created, till it's no longer required. They also mention the true copy, static and dynamic. Static is very straightforward. I just return this completed form. Here it is. That's a true copy. But dynamic is a little bit different. I have this interaction with this instrument. It records who I did, what parameters I set, and the recording the actual results in a file. And then it generates a report. The true copy is that report plus that data. That's what's required for a true copy of the dynamic data. And then audit trail. They're interested in the standard stuff, edit, add, edit, and delete other transactions. But they may also want to know, did you review the audit records? And there's some other little things beyond that add, edit, and delete they want to know about. How about renaming a file? That's an edit thing, but many systems don't keep track of a file that's not part of the system. They say in the audit record that it's batch record 123 dash and some date or however you track it. And they look and they can't find the record. They find something else on that date that says test. Then they see test 2 and test 3, and then they finally find one with the right number on it. Well, how did that test 1, test 2, and test 3 get created? We're missing something between the audit record and the actual records we're finding. So the FDA found some issues of use in documents that were not controlled. If we look back at that 483, one is not in place to ensure that submitted paper documents are original, true copies of that document. Not copies made on a copier and then filled out, but the original document printed out, filled out, and returned. How do you track that? The number of documents printed by a user are not tracked. Or if they need additional documents reprinted for whatever reason, spilled their coffee on it, they return them and say, I needed these 5 pages reprinted because I made a mistake. Do you record the justification as to why you need those printed? And what about controlling of the printed blank documents and the distribution of those documents? In the situation, the FDA observed people printing more documents that were needed and then discarding the extras. The FDA expects you only print the number of documents you need. You identify those documents and that no additional ones are created. They also observed that the originals weren't returned, but actual copies of them. And they were found that they discarded the originals and any extra copies they made. So they were preparing for mistakes they made, or they made mistakes and they had extra copies and they used those copies instead of the original. There was no way to identify that except their observation of someone doing this. But what they did do was look in the shred bins, and they actually discovered the original documents and then the copies. And they said, well, which is the original or which is a copy? It was not able to determine that. And so they got cited for this. And then use of uncontrolled documents. Those they had put on shared drives in the company. It was available to the people and they would print those out instead of the original, or they would generate a PDF of a document, save it locally, so they wouldn't have to go back to Doc Control and get copies of it. So Doc Control had no control of the documents at that point. So what is a controlled document per ISO and FDA? You need to keep track of the issued documents, where the document went and the revision used, how many documents were printed and by who. All unused or incomplete documents must be returned back to document control, and account for all printed documents. This is a big challenge for the document control group. So unless you have the capability of controlling printing, all printing should be performed by document control group. And the use of expiration watermarks on those documents that can have them on, or on those forms, have some other way to track them. One would be using a unique identifier on each page of the document that is put into a logbook of who printed it or who requested it, how many did they request, why they requested them, and when they are due back. So you can say, when I get them back, I know these are originals. And then you need a way to notify when those documents are past due, or if a document has been revised and they need to use a new version of it and they need to surrender the old one. So they have a form and that form's been revised for whatever reason and they still have the old form, then they return those forms and get new ones. But you have to account one for one. If I give you 5 new ones, you gotta give me the 5 old ones back. Okay, one of the things we could do, printing of documents. Once a document is printed, no additional copies can be printed without justification. This can only be managed by most systems by document control. There is no mechanism in there to control that you can only print 3 and not 10. When you do print it, a task needs to be assigned to you. Somehow the system needs to track that you have that document with an expiration date of when it's due back to document control. And then once it's returned, some kind of workflow is initiated to dispose of the document when it's no longer needed. So the whole life cycle. So when I go and print out that document, I get it back, filled out, signed by the person, I store it. That's the creation of that document. Now I track it through its life cycle. So I move it to local archive for people that can look at it. Then I put it to long-term archive, and then I finally get notified that I need to dispose of that document, and how do I handle that? Those are all part of the guidance document. Okay, one of the big problems that many companies have is I can print out that document, I could go to the copier and make 10 more copies, and there's no way for me to tell that's a different document. Because the copiers are so good, they could actually be used for counterfeiting. That's why the intelligence has been put into dollar bills or $20 bills. You need to have some kind of intelligence built in that the original document is known as original. And if you make a copy of it, you know it's a copy. There are different tools that you can use to do this on these copiers. Here's a few of them. Okay. When a document is returned to document control, what do? If you have a mechanism for logging and tracking that document, you scan that document back for its unique identifier, a unique number you've stamped on it or the system stamped on it. And you can track it back to that person when they printed it and it was returned when it was supposed to be returned. You have all that. You can reject documents that are not originals. You know they were made as copies. You have some mechanism for doing this. Only document control can check out or check original documents into the system. You don't give access to the end user to say, scan it and put it in. And doc control disposes of blank or unused forms. The key is you must be able to prove to the FDA that the document that was printed is the same document returned, not a copy, and that all copies have been returned as well if they were made. And all unused or blank forms were returned to document control as well. They weren't disposed of in the trash can or shredder. In the case of this company, they looked at the shredder and they found blank forms in there. They found forms in partially filled out or complete forms with some errors on them, and they just disposed of them, had a copy there, created a whole new one. So they didn't track the originals. They had no control over it. 4 takeaways or 4 things you should look at when you're looking for a document control system if you still have a manual process or you're looking to go to a new one. Does that document control allow you to have a dynamic workflow? Do you have the ability to scan in and do data capture? That means taking that museum piece and extracting the data off of it before you store. Do you have a way to have records or archive management, meaning I get when it was created, I have that, I know when it got to go through its life cycle, and when it's finally, I can dispose of it. And then how do you handle hard copy documents? Is there a way to put a unique control number on every page printed? You know who printed them, when they printed them, how many they were allowed to print, so forth. And that you know it's original versus copies. You need some mechanism for doing this. Now, the good thing is many companies, and this company that got this 43, has looked at moving away from paper forms. They have a big push to automate this. So when they went and chose a quality management system, they look for one that they can go and build or automate processes. Well, you say that's great, but that takes a long time. It's a lot of validation work, so forth. Well, I'll address those in the next few slides. So the big leap from the 50s to the 21st century for doc control and for QMS was that many of the systems on the market have the tools from the 50s. And you're going to say, well, what are these tools from the 1950s? What are these tools from 1996 and so forth? I'll go through those shortly and just talk about those. But this all relates back, again, to document control, because this is mainly the owner of forms and so forth and processed documents. So many of the systems on the market start to implement and have some of these tools from the 50s. They have some of the tools from the 1996 timeframe, that's around Lean Six Sigma. And then what ASQ calls Quality 4.0. There's probably 1 or 2, maybe 3 systems on the market that can actually do all this stuff and make your life as a document control person much easier. Most companies will buy a document control system as part of this QMS system. So that's why I'm going to focus on that particular area versus just purely a document control system, such as an open text or something like that. So here's some of the tools from Ishikawa, Deming, so forth from the 50s. Your quality management system should have these things. So if you get data in from a document, you have a way to analyze that data. Right now, it's mainly done in spreadsheets. They're not part of these core systems. Or if they are, they're very limited, very hard to do. You have to actually build up a whole system to get the data in. Then you jump into the Lean Six Sigma world, where the project charter came out to define what's going to be done in that process. You have the process map. You have stuff called swim lanes or process walkthroughs. So your quality management system that you're using should have this stuff to be able to do this. Cause effect diagrams, 5 whys, the value added flow analysis, so forth. Control charting, all this stuff that comes from forms that are completed to analyze. And then you have the quality tools from ASQ Quality 4.0, the artificial intelligence, the blockchain, the deep learning, machine learning, data science, and so forth. These are some of the tools that when you log into Amazon, they use AI. They use data science and so forth to see how many people are buying what, to recommend view certain things. This is all built on the data they collect electronically. Amazon does not work with forms. They work electronically. They implemented this system as a fully electronic system to know what you would be buying. They used AI from the beginning. And this is where your goal should be. To make your life easier as a doc control person, you should be automating as many of these processes as possible or working with teams to do this. But you say, well, that's great. It takes me 6 to 9 months to automate a process and to validate it. Well, that's true if you use the waterfall method from GAMP to do validation and you use that same technology to build a system. It's not very efficient. Instead, what ASQ says, people, the quality professionals, need to move away from that reactor enforcer role to a more proactive innovator leader. The only way you can do this is moving away from that paper form process that is a challenge for document control to an automated process. Your processes are flawless, but you don't know that. You don't have the data to look at it. And data integrity will become more important as you do these automations. But right now it's important from a document control perspective because you have paper forms. There's systems out there that allow you to automate those paper forms, but all you're doing is moving it from paper to a system. Yeah, it makes it easier, but you're not really doing anything with the data, as Deming would say. And then technology. Years ago, it was very challenging for companies to do anything in automation. That's why you still have paper forms. That's why document control process has not changed from the 1950s. Technology has moved you from paper to Windows platform to internet or .NET platform or whatever, to finally, now you can actually automate. The costs are very low to do this. The systems you buy, the quality systems on the market give you these capabilities at a very low cost. So you can move away from this data analyst role to a data wrangler, taking control of your data and analyzing with the new technologies to be more predictive of what will happen. So one of these tools is called Quality Business Process Management. What this is a business process management tool with quality components built on it. So it addresses all those quality tools from the 50s, this 1960, the lean stuff, and the quality 4.0. Inherent problem with this is it's still challenging to automate. You still need or dependent on IT or consultants to do a lot of this automation. So what do? Well, there is a platform called Intelligence Quality Business Process Management. A lot of words here. What that means is, in simple words, is you as a quality person can take or move away from these paper forms and automate these processes. Using that Lean Six Sigma terminology, these tools come with that capability to quickly automate. But you say validation is a challenge. Well, the FDA came out or is coming out with that guidance document that's really based on what they call the agile methodology to quickly automate systems that actually meet the requirements of the user and to document it as you go, building quality into the process, building validation into that whole design from the beginning. So you're documenting as you go. You have stuff called things like user stories, storyboards, examples, these terminologies. But what this allows you to do is quickly automate a process that is fully compliant with 21 CFR Part 11, GDPR, and so forth, HIPAA, but doing it in weeks versus months or years. It's no more, it's going to take you 6 months to automate a process. No, it takes you 6 weeks to automate that process and validate it. I know because we work with companies that have done this, where the quality person has taken it on to automate processes, to move away from that challenge that document control has of managing those controlled documents on the floor, to automating the process and eliminating the paper. So the paper is no longer a museum piece. It's actually data that can be analyzed. The big thing is it doesn't need the IT person to be involved. The disadvantage is there's a limited number of vendors in the market that can do this. So where do we go from here? Validation greatly reduced when you move to what we call the agile method versus the Gantt waterfall method. A lot quicker to do validation, a lot more accurate. Risk is built into the process. These systems, these IQMS, QBPM, systems have data integrity as part of the core thing. They're 21 CFR Part 11 compliant. They comply with the European GDPR regulation. They comply with HIPAA and other government regulations. They're very quick to deliver an automated process in weeks versus months with much better documentation and testing. You as a user, not a user anymore, but as a, automator, are doing this from the get-go. You're building or have a platform that allows you to move away from that paper, to eliminate that challenge that you have of managing that piece of paper on the floor, ensuring you get the original back versus a copy, to automating the process. One of the keys is that data is encrypted. There's a level of security. You cannot get to that data. You cannot change the data without going through the system, and everything's tracked in their audit records. But again, there's only a few vendors that understand and have these tools available to you. Here's some white papers and a webinar that you can go look at on our website. I believe you have access to these slides so you can get to these. So I will now take any questions or answers you may have. And thank you, if there are none. I'm going to stop sharing right now and stop this recording.